Good afternoon. My name is Robin Taube, and I'm the author of A Parent's Guide to Raising Money Smart Kids. I'm really happy to be here with you this afternoon to talk to you about how to teach your kids about money. We have about an hour or so together, and because we have a lot to get through, please, if you don't mind, hold your questions until the end. And also, because I really appreciate having your undivided attention, copies of the slides as well as some resources and worksheets we'll be handing out will be available at the end of the presentation. Today we're focusing on our kids and helping them learn about money. As a parent, you are the best person to teach them. In fact, according to a recent survey conducted by the CICA, over 90% of Canadian youth believe that teaching money skills at home should be a priority for parents, and 83% have approached their parents for advice about money. Teaching them at an early age builds a foundation for the knowledge, skills, and confidence that they need to make responsible financial decisions throughout their lives. So I imagine that most of you are here because you have kids. So who here has kids 5 to 8 years old? And what about 9 to 12? Does anybody here have teenagers? Me? And what about emerging adults in university? All right, well, today we're going to talk about why teaching about money is important for all of those different ages. We're going to discuss the goals and challenges of raising money smart kids, how financial decisions evolve throughout childhood, age-appropriate approaches to teaching your kids, including tips on allowance, budgets, credit cards, and technology. And we'll provide you with some tools and resources before opening up to a Q&A at the end. So the Canadian Institute of Chartered Accountants recently commissioned research about Canada's level of financial literacy. The results were consistent with the findings and recommendations of Canada's Task Force on Financial Literacy, and they were a wake-up call. Canadians need to improve their levels of financial literacy and their financial literacy skills. Financial literacy is critical to Canadian prosperity and economic growth. And it's more than just a nice-to-have skill. It's a necessity in today's world. Most Canadians believe responsible money management is an important life skill and one that should be taught to kids. As chartered accountants, we know about money. Advising individuals and businesses about their money is what we do. The CICA and our members across the country are uniquely positioned to help Canadians, and we're taking a proactive approach by delivering seminars such as these. So our goal as parents is to raise kids to be happy, healthy, successful adults who can manage their financial lives independently for their sake as well as our own. If we don't succeed in teaching our kids about money, it may come back to haunt us. How would you feel, for instance, if you had to support your adult children financially? Or if you had to bail them out of a financial mess with savings that you'd accumulated and set aside for your own future? And what if this happened when you were supposed to be enjoying your carefree retirement years? It's not a pretty picture. These are the consequences for us as parents, but what about the kids themselves? If you've ever struggled with financial problems that were brought on by bad habits or just not knowing how to manage your money well, you know what a negative impact it can have on your life and on the relationships with the people closest to you. Certainly, we don't want that for our kids. So let's take a look at some of the common challenges parents face when teaching their kids about money. Our research shows that although 78% of parents have tried to teach their kids about money, the majority don't feel they've been particularly successful at it. One of the main reasons is they think that their kids are too young or they're not interested. According to the survey I mentioned before, parents tend to wait until their children are in their late teens before teaching them financial management skills. But there are lots of ways to engage younger children. The key with them is to make it fun and to make it relevant, to put it into terms that they can relate to. Although it may not feel like a priority when your kids are young, these early years are an important time to lay the foundation and teach the basics. That when you earn money, you have 4 choices. You can save it, spend it, donate it, or invest it. The concepts are the same as your kids get older, but the stakes get much higher. It's better if they can learn from their mistakes when the stakes are low. So at what age did you notice your children becoming interested in money, and how did you know? What kinds of questions did they ask you? Other challenges parents face are lack of knowledge, lack of time, and lack of opportunity, or not always recognizing when an opportunity presents itself. So look for those teachable moments in your everyday lives, like going grocery shopping, using your credit card at a restaurant, or going to the mall. Even planning a birthday party is an opportunity to teach a financial lesson on budgeting and sharing. Teaching your kids how to manage money is particularly hard if you're not good at it yourself. In fact, it's embarrassing. It becomes really easy just to avoid the conversation altogether, especially when you're so busy running a household. So a lot of parents procrastinate. What if your kids are already teenagers and you've never taught them anything about money? Is it too late? I don't think it's ever too late to learn a new skill or to learn how to do something better. But as you'll see later, you should approach it differently than you would with younger kids. So before I get into tips on individual age groups, I want to present an overview of my basic philosophy, which I just touched on. At every stage when your child earns money, they have 4 choices: save, spend, share, and invest. How they implement these decisions evolves as they grow older. If you look at the chart, one commonality you'll notice across the age groups is allowance. From a few dollars at a young age to major infusions of cash when they go to university. More about that later. When it comes to saving, kids start with a piggy bank, move on to a youth account, then a bank account or GIC, and then more complicated or sophisticated investment vehicles. Lessons around saving versus spending cannot happen too early. Look for those teachable moments again that I mentioned earlier for kids to see the value in saving and watching their money grow. Setting this foundation will help them when the time comes to follow a budget, and I'll elaborate on many of these topics as we go along. Sharing opportunities range from donating birthday money to charity to active fundraising. But sharing isn't always about money. Sometimes it's about community work, volunteering time and talents to help others. Most students are now required to volunteer in order to graduate from high school. And finally, when it comes to investing, before your kids embark on an entrepreneurial journey at any age, help them think it through. Will they need equipment or materials? And if so, how will they pay for them? If they need to borrow money for startup capital, how will they pay it back? Teens are mature enough to understand the concept of compound interest, earning interest on your interest as well as your original capital. And emerging adults should know about investing for the long term with stocks, bonds, and other investments. Let's start with some tips for young kids who are aged 5 to 8. Because of their age and lack of maturity, young kids need a lot of guidance. They probably don't have a realistic attitude about money. So start with the fundamentals like, what is money and what value do you get from money? And you can introduce them to different denominations of bills and coins, explain their relative values and what certain amounts can buy, and use examples from their world, like an apple costs 50 cents, but an ice cream cone costs $3. Do you think your child knows what you do for a living? You'd be surprised. A lot of young kids don't. And if you haven't, have a discussion about it with your kids. Help your kids understand where your household money comes from. This will reinforce the fact that there isn't a money tree in the backyard. You can also bring your kids with you to the bank or the ATM. Just make sure you explain, again, that you can't get money out if you don't put money in. It's sort of like a giant piggy bank. Allowance, money for gifts, holidays and birthdays, and tooth fairy money all provide kids with their first earnings. And even though piggy banks are old-fashioned, they're still a great way to teach kids to save. And nowadays you can even find piggy banks that have, instead of 1 slot, they have 4 slots for save, spend, donate, and invest. Watch for those teachable moments. We talked about a trip to the grocery store or the mall, and that can include making a list, finding and cutting out discount coupons, comparison shopping, paying the bill, and counting the change. Also, board games like Monopoly and Life are a fun way to learn about money as a family. Next, we're going to talk about teaching preteens. Preteens are going through many changes, and hopefully they're becoming a little more responsible and a little better at math. Many are being introduced to the world of work and money through part-time jobs like babysitting, dog walking, or snow shoveling for neighbors. It's time to graduate from a piggy bank to a bank account. Youth accounts generally don't have fees, but they pay very low rates of interest. This is a good time to discuss the whole concept of interest with your preteen. Talk about how banks pay you on your savings, but charge you when you borrow money. Once they've accumulated a large amount of savings, you can talk about the benefit of transferring some of it to a GIC, which normally pays a higher rate of interest, but can't be redeemed before the maturity date. One effective way to encourage kids towards a goal that they've chosen is to offer to match their savings. Kids respond well to getting free money. Your preteen will get a debit card when she opens her youth account. So you may want to set certain parameters. Who keeps the card, and can they withdraw money from an ATM without adult supervision? Make sure they know that there's usually limits as to how much they can withdraw or how much they can spend on debit purchases per day or per week. And of course, money must be in the account in order for them to make a withdrawal or a debit purchase. Remind them to be very careful not to lose their card or to share their PIN with anybody. And jointly with your child, you can track the progress of their account either online or with print statements. Preteens are exposed to a lot of advertising, and they may not understand that its purpose is to seduce you into buying things that you might not otherwise. So it's your job to help them become media savvy. Preteens rely a lot on what their friends say. By age 12, most kids will side with their peers over their parents when it comes to purchasing decisions. When your kids do save up and buy something with their own money, take the time to debrief about it afterwards. Ask them a few questions like, was it worth the money? Was it worth the time and effort it took to save up for the item? What did they like or dislike about the shopping experience? And what, if anything, would they do differently next time? Teenage years are a time of transition to the adult world with more financial responsibilities, and ideally you've been teaching your kids about money all along. But if you haven't, it's never too late to teach the basics, because this is a crucial time for your teen to develop sound money management skills. 85% of youth believe that teenagers who are taught financial literacy skills by their parents are more likely to be financially successful in life. Teenagers can get into some relatively serious earnings with their first real job. So walk them through their paycheck, explaining that gross versus net pay is the result of tax withholdings, Canada Pension Plan contributions, and employment insurance contributions. Here are some other basics to discuss. Cash is king. That's one of those mottos, you hear it all the time. And what you want them to understand is that when you have cash, you're in the position to take advantage of opportunities and to ride out difficult times. Whereas when you're in debt, you're almost like you're enslaved, because interest on the debt and the debt itself is like a weight that you're dragging around, and you can't react to opportunities in the same way. Compound interest is a double-edged sword. It's great when you're a saver and it's working for you, but it will work just as hard against you if you're a borrower. Have them get into the habit of paying themselves first. Every month, have them take a certain amount of money directly from their earnings and put it into savings. And to make sure that it actually happens, set it up as an automatic transfer. That way they can only spend what's left. A rule of thumb is to save 5 or 10%. Have them get into the habit of tracking their spending. It makes them more aware of their spending habits. It's also a great reality check. They may be shocked to learn that their actual spending bears very little resemblance to how they think they're spending their money. And writing everything down may provide them with the motivation they need to make better spending choices. Teenagers are prey to spending temptations, media, and peer pressure. So is everybody here familiar with the term the latte factor? So everybody has a latte factor. It's those little indulgences like fancy coffees that are expensive but can really add up without you noticing. And your teen has a latte factor too. Just ask them about it. Show them how to spend wisely by shopping sales, using coupons, getting discounts, comparison shopping, and negotiating and bargaining. And finally, encourage them to use their personal values to set goals. For example, if they value adventure and want to travel, have them start a travel fund. And we have a worksheet to help your teen discover their values and another one to set specific and measurable goals. So let's move on to young adults who finish high school and may be considering going to college or university. Of those who've received money management advice from their parents, 70% are optimistic or very optimistic about their financial futures. One of the financial rites of passage is filing a tax return. Special tax credits for tuition and textbooks and education amounts are available for students and can be used to reduce any taxes that they owe. They should also know about tax advantage savings vehicles like the tax-free savings account or an RRSP. One of the most daunting tasks for a family is paying for post-secondary education. And there are different ways to finance it. It could be a combination of your savings, current earnings, scholarships, your child's savings or earnings from their work, or loans, student loans, or amounts borrowed from a line of credit. Students need a plan to pay off student debt within a reasonable period of time. In fact, the Federal Task Force on Financial Literacy recommends a financial literacy component be integrated into the Canada student loan program for students that receive funding. This may take the form of mandatory counseling about credit and debt. If your child does get student loans, under certain circumstances, they can claim the interest paid as a tax credit. And if they don't use the credit, they can carry it forward for 5 years. Now I want to get back to some of the financial themes that cut across the age groups. And the first one is allowance, because allowance is a hotly debated issue. Should it be given as payment for chores? Is it a money management tool? Or is it both? For many of us here, when we grew up, we got an allowance for doing some basic chores around the house, and if we didn't do them, our parents held back on our allowance. Because back then, nobody really thought about an allowance as a way to teach your kids about money. But if you hold back on allowance, you're really depriving your kids of the opportunity to teach them, when the stakes are low. So some families feel that paying their child to do chores around the house sends the wrong message, and they feel that those chores should be done as a family responsibility. Whereas others disagree and they feel that kids need to earn their allowance. What do most people here do? Do you tie your allowance to chores, or do you just give it as a money management tool? There's really no right or wrong answer. As always, you have to do what works for your family. But whatever the case, communicate to your children what the allowance is for, what the expectations are, how much they're getting, and pay it to them regularly so that they can rely on that money coming in. For young kids, a rule of thumb is to pay $1 per year of age per week. Whether they're working or not, though, preteens and teens still need an allowance. But now you can use it to gradually transfer more financial responsibility to them to cover their basic needs and some of their wants. Allowance will even continue when your young adult heads off to university. For older kids, allowance and budgets go hand in hand. When kids are spending their own money, even if you've given it to them as an allowance, they tend to think a lot longer and harder about a potential purchase, whether they really need it or just want it. When they're spending your money, it never seems to count in the same way. So when kids become preteens and teens, decide who pays for what and what comes out of their allowance by referring back to a budget that you create together. If you have teens, give them more responsibility by having the budget cover things like clothing, transportation, and entertainment. They need to learn to be accountable to you for the increased responsibility, so encourage them to keep receipts. This is also useful for tweaking the budget to see if maybe it's not enough in certain areas. At the end of the session, we're going to give you a teen budget worksheet. And for emerging adults, this is when they're living on their own for the first time, and they have to plan and manage a much more comprehensive budget, plus their own bank account and credit card. So we're going to give you a post-secondary budget worksheet as well at the end of the session. Okay, now we're going to look at credit cards. Although preteens and teens don't have their own credit cards, it's a good time to inform them about how they work. Explain that, unlike paying with cash or a debit card, the money doesn't come out of your bank account right away. Instead, you pay later when the credit card bill is due. Show them your credit card statements so they can see the amounts and the entries. And you can show them how all the purchases add up to one large sum that you have to pay at the end of the month. And then if you don't pay it on time, you're charged interest because borrowing money costs money. You can discuss the power of compounding, that the amount you owe keeps growing if you don't pay your balance off on the due date. And you can also scare them by reading them that alarming statement that's on your credit card that tells you how many years and months it will take to pay off your balance if you only pay the minimum payment each month. Emerging adults, if they've reached the age of majority, they can get their own credit card. So make sure you discuss the appropriate use of credit and credit cards, including the benefits and the risks. So key benefits are convenience and practicality. They allow you to create a credit history and earn a credit rating. You can earn rewards like frequent flyer miles, and they're also the only method of paying for online shopping. But risks and disadvantages include the ability to damage your credit rating if you miss payments or your payments are late. Credit cards are more expensive than personal lines of credit, and if they're not used responsibly, they can lead to increased spending and bad debt. So you have to talk to them about the need to look for a low-interest card and stress the importance of paying their balances off on time. And some cards will even provide students with discounts. Technology has transformed everything, including how we communicate and how we manage money. So let's talk first about cell phones. So how old were your kids when they got their first cell phone? And are you finding that your younger kids are getting cell phones at an even earlier age, and not even just the old clamshell phone, but like a high-featured smartphone or BlackBerry? It's actually crazy. But every family has to decide for themselves whether a cell phone is appropriate for their child and affordable. But even if you're paying the bill, your preteen should still be involved in the purchase of the phone and the plan. And a friend of mine figured out a way to get his kids involved in the process by taking them he took his kids with him to the mall and had them walk around to the different kiosks and discuss the different plan options with the different providers. Because the kids had to think through how they plan to use the phone. How much texting do they need? Do they need a data plan for internet access? Were they even going to use the phone to talk on? A lot of kids don't even talk on their cell phones. So once they chose the plan they felt was the most appropriate, they had to present it to their father, pitch it to them, and that's how they made their decision. And that way they understood the package, and there was less likelihood that they would go over. But the kids understood that if they did, it was their responsibility to cover overages with their allowance. And one just little tip is that if you travel outside of Canada, encourage your kids to leave the phones at home because roaming charges are exorbitant. Because teens and emerging adults are such avid users of technology, they should be encouraged to use their smartphones to help them manage money. You can use a smartphone to track your spending and to manage your bank accounts online, and kids seem to be very natural with these kinds of applications. And finally, we're going to look at virtual spending. This is something our parents never had to worry about with us. So now there's a whole world of ways to spend money online. There's iTunes and eBay and e-commerce websites and so many temptations. And preteens need to understand that although they're not using cash, they're still spending real money. It's wise to talk to them about the way online transactions work so they don't accidentally buy things. And if they're going to buy things online with your credit card, it should be part of their budget and their allowance. For any age, it's good to remember to be careful when using any website that asks for confidential information. And just be careful when you're sharing personal information on social media sites, because this can lead to identity theft, fraud, and other scams. So to wrap up, I wanted to summarize some of the key messages. Teaching kids about money when they're young can be fun for them and for you. Take advantage of teachable moments as they crop up in your everyday life to have a conversation with your kids about money. And keep the information age appropriate. The money habits that kids form as preteens can be the foundation for how they relate to money when they get older. So make sure that they develop healthy habits. As kids mature, they're better able to grasp the rationale behind budgeting and more likely to be accountable for a budget. Teens are not too young to set meaningful financial goals, ones that are tied to their values. Some teens and young adults may be interested in learning about investing. The sooner they learn the basic concepts, the better they're prepared when they actually do have money to invest. Parents mistakenly tend to wait until their kids are in their late teens before teaching about credit cards, budgeting, investing, and minimizing interest on debt. So don't procrastinate. And finally, volunteering is a great way for young people to put their values into action, and it pays off in terms of real-world experience and personal satisfaction. So we're going to hand out a number of worksheets to help you and your kids with the various money matters we've talked about. So we're going to give you a goal-setting worksheet, the teen budget, and a post-secondary student budget, as well as the role model self-assessment and a values validator. And to further help you with your teaching, there are a range of resources that are available, and here are just a few that we recommend. The first is Parents' Guide to Raising Money Smart Kids, available at castore.ca/moneysmartkids. Then there is the companion module in this Financial Decisions Matter series called Are You a Good Financial Role Model for Your Children? There's the CICA's website, financialdecisionsmatter.com. Resources from the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy of Canada, as well as the Manitoba Securities Commission, and finally the Investor Education Fund's website, which has comprehensive resources on personal finance and investing. So I want to thank everybody for their time today, and I hope I've given you the information and skills that you need to speak to your kids and teach them about money. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions. Thank you.